Ever look at election results and just think, that doesn't feel right? Where the final tally just doesn't seem to match up with how people actually voted? Well, if you've felt that, you are definitely not alone. So today, we're going to dig into why our elections can feel so, well, broken. And we'll look at a solution that, believe it or not, most democracies around the world are already using.
All right, let's kick things off with a bit of a puzzle. This is a real-world example that, honestly, it shines a huge spotlight on a really deep flaw in how American democracy is set up. And I think it's going to challenge what you might think you know about what fair representation even means.
Okay, so where are we going for this puzzle? We're heading to Massachusetts. Now, when you picture the Bay State, what comes to mind? Probably a bastion of liberalism, right? Progressive politics, a really diverse population. And look, in a lot of ways, you'd be totally right.
But, and this is a big but, when you start to pull back the curtain and actually look at the hard data from their elections, a really surprising, kind of startling picture starts to form. The numbers, they just don't add up.
Okay, so check this out. Let's look at the numbers. In statewide elections, Republicans pretty consistently pull in over a third of the total vote. That's a big chunk of the population. But then you look at the state Senate, and they hold only about 10% of the seats. I mean, that is a huge, massive disconnect between how people are voting and who actually gets power.
And this isn't just a simple story about Democrats versus Republicans. It's also about racial representation. People of color make up almost a third of the state's population. But look at their share of the legislature. It's only about half that. And get this, that disparity is actually worse than what you see in states like Alabama or Texas. Wild, right?
So, what's going on here? I know what you're probably thinking. Gerrymandering. Politicians drawing wacky district lines to lock in their power. And yeah, that's definitely a problem in a lot of places. But here, that's not the whole story. Not even close. The real problem is actually something much, much deeper.
The issue is way more fundamental. It's not about the map makers, it's about the map itself. It's about the basic rules of the game we're all playing, a system that's baked right into the DNA of our elections.
Okay, so for pretty much all of our elections, we use something called single-member districts. The idea is really simple. You take a state, you carve it up into different areas, and each one of those areas gets to elect exactly one person to represent them. In fact, there's a federal law from 1967 that says this is how we have to do it for all U.S. House elections.
And this one winner per district thing creates what's called a winner-take-all system. Think about it. If your candidate gets just over half the vote, say 51%, they get 100% of the power. But if your candidate gets 49%, you get zero representation. All those votes for the losing candidates, they're basically wasted. They don't end up electing anybody.
And this right here, this is the core of the problem. A group of mathematicians actually studied Massachusetts and found something incredible. Because Republican voters are spread out so evenly across the state, it is literally mathematically impossible to draw a U.S. House district that a Republican could win. I mean, think about that. Even if you draw the fairest, most perfect maps possible, a full third of the voters in the state get completely shut out of having a voice in Congress.
Okay, so if the system itself is broken, what do? How do we fix it? Well, the good news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It turns out that most modern democracies on Earth have already figured this out. The answer is pretty simple, actually. Make our legislatures, well, actually look like the people who elected them.
And this idea, it's not some radical, newfangled invention. It actually goes all the way back to the founding of the country. John Adams himself said that our legislatures should be an exact portrait, in miniature, of the people. In other words, they should be a perfect little snapshot reflecting all the different views that people hold.
Today, we call this idea proportional representation. And the principle couldn't be simpler. If a party gets, say, 30% of the votes, they should get about 30% of the seats. That's it. Your share of the votes equals your share of the power. Makes sense, right?
So how do we actually do this? How do we make it happen? Well, one of the most common ways is something called proportional ranked choice voting. Now, I know, that sounds a little complicated, but stick with me, it's really just two simple changes. First, you make bigger districts that elect a team of people instead of just one. And second, you use a ranked ballot. Let me show you how it works. So instead of a small district electing just one person, imagine a larger district that elects a team of, say, 3 people. Now, to win a seat, you don't need to get over 50% of the vote. You just need to hit a certain threshold. In this example, it's 25%. So in round 1, we just count everyone's number 1 choice. And look at that. The orange candidate gets 47%, easily sailing past that 25% line. Boom, they've won the first seat.
But here's the cool part. That winner only needed 25% to win, but they got 47%. In our current system, all those extra votes, they're just wasted. But not here. That surplus, that extra 22% of votes, gets transferred to those voters' second choices. And look what happens. Those votes help the light orange candidate get over the 25% finish line. Now they've won the second seat. See, no vote is wasted.
All right, what about the other side of things? We look at the candidate who's in last place. To stop them from being a spoiler and just splitting the vote, they're eliminated from the race. But, and this is so important, their supporters' votes are not eliminated.
Instead, every single one of their votes instantly goes to that voter's next choice on their ballot. And just like that, you can see how that process helps the purple candidate get over the threshold and win that final seat. So what's the end result? Pretty much every single voter gets to help elect a candidate they actually support.
So this isn't just some abstract, theoretical idea about fairness. Switching to a system like this would have a huge, immediate impact on who actually represents us. It would make our government a much more accurate reflection of who we are as a country.
Let's bring it back to Massachusetts for a second. Remember that crazy situation where Republicans get a third of the votes but 0 seats in the U.S. House? Well, a proportional system totally fixes that. That 9-person team would go from being 100% Democratic to a 6-3 split. That's a near-perfect match for the statewide vote.
And the impact here is way bigger than just one state. Imagine this happening everywhere. When you have more viewpoints represented, Democrats getting elected in deep red states and Republicans in deep blue ones, politicians suddenly have a real reason to work together, to build coalitions, instead of just shouting to their base. It could be a powerful antidote to how polarized and divided everything feels, making our whole democracy stronger and more resilient.
We spend so much time and energy arguing about who we should vote for. But what if that's not the most important question? What if the real key to fixing our politics isn't about changing the people we vote for, but changing the very system we use to count our votes in the first place?